The Darkin are a topic I've talked about extensively in the past. I've made 2 entire videos dedicated to Aatrox and Varys alone, as well as a handful of posts about the Darkin saga both on my community tab and my Tumblr blog. Honestly, I'd reached the point where I kinda got sick of discussing them, and I really didn't think I'd ever be making another video on them because I'd said just about everything I really had to say on the matter. But after taking some time away from the Darkin and focusing on some other subjects, I've decided to revisit the topic one last time, just to thoroughly cement all of my thoughts and opinions on the matter, I guess. As I've already covered the history of the Darkin extensively in my Aatrox and Varys videos, I won't be delving super deep into that this time. What you need to know, in case you didn't already, is that the Darkin were initially introduced as this mysterious race of beings of whom there were only 5 left. We knew nothing about this race apart from the fact that Aatrox was apparently one of them. Fast forward a few years later, and the Darkin are basically revealed to be aliens from another world/dimension who came to Runeterra to steal its magic, only to be imprisoned in their own weapons. This explanation was a little controversial, so then Riot reworked Aatrox and made it so that the Darkin are actually fallen ascended from Shurima that were sealed inside their weapons instead. That has been the canon ever since, and that is what I want to talk about today. Anyone who's been following me for a while will probably know my general stance on this topic, that I believe the Darkin would have worked much better if they were simply retconned into being demons. My reasoning for this is that, well, that's basically what they are in everything but name. They are cursed weapons that possess the bodies of whoever wields them, they wield a plethora of dark magic, and most of them straight up look demonic, something that is even acknowledged in canon. Now, I've gone on record saying that I don't completely hate the Ascended retcon, and I stand by that claim. In fact, most of the community seems to like or at least accept this storyline, and I can absolutely see why. Twilight of the Gods remains one of my favorite stories on the League Universe page. However, my biggest gripe with this plot point, which has been significantly amplified thanks to the Darkin saga in LOR, is that the story seems almost entirely uninterested in exploring the idea further. What's more, the retroactive addition of more God Warriors kind of complicates the established narrative a bit. What do I mean? Well, let's venture back in time a little. Back when Shurima was first retconned into being what it is now, we had 4 ascended characters: Nasus, Renekton, Xerath, and Azir. Nasus and Renekton actually predate Xerath and Azir as ascended, having undergone the rite well before Azir's reign. Now, it was never directly stated that they were the only ascended in Shurima before Xerath's coup, but it was kind of implied. After all, Nasus and Renekton were stated to be the only ones capable of stopping Xerath. I guess you can interpret this as them being the only ascended in or around the capital, since they were the Emperor's personal guards, but the fact remains. If there were over a dozen other ascended scattered throughout Shurima when Xerath usurped Azir, why didn't Nasus or Renekton ever bother seeking their aid? And please don't give me that whole spiel about them being mentally unstable or divided after the Void War. That whole situation has always been extremely awkward to me. Like, Xerath creating a power vacuum was already more than enough reason for the Ascended to start fighting one another after he was sealed away. The whole point of Twilight of the Gods was to show that even these self-proclaimed deities were still human at heart, capable of harboring greed or grudges that drove them to fight one another over control of what remained of their empire. It's just that they were also semi-partially void-corrupted, and also Zelani used her blood magic to control 1 or 2 of them into attacking one another. So, there's several different catalysts for why the Darkin War began, when again, the lack of an immediate successor to Azir would have been fine enough on its own. Even beyond all of that, though, there's an even bigger issue that I have with this whole affair. The fact that the Darkin and the Ascended feel totally disconnected from each other. Like, am I the only one who's noticed that the former barely have any interaction at all with the latter? Varys has a total of one voice line in League for encountering Ascended champions, and that's it. Like, the Darkin clearly have a bunch of history among themselves, but why do they not have anything to say about Nasus and Renekton, the only two remaining members of the Ascended host who aren't bound to weapons? Hell, why do they have nothing to say about Zareth or Azir, the men directly responsible for the destruction of the Empire in the first place? Azir's attempted right of ascension and Zareth's usurpation of it are the original catalyst for the Darkin War, before all that other stuff was added in. And they just have nothing to say to these two? The last emperor of Shurima returned from the dead, and the slave who became a god to dethrone him? Even if the Darkin never personally met these two, you'd think they would at least have a few thoughts about the duo, especially now that they're waging another Ascended civil war. I guess, more than anything else, that's my biggest issue. The Darkin and the Ascended storylines have been written in such a way that they feel totally disconnected, even though they should technically be part of one another. The fallen God Warriors have no interaction at all with the only remaining pure Ascended, and Nasus, Zareth, Renekton, and Azir don't even seem to know that the Darkin exist, insofar as we're aware. Instead, the Darkin all seem to have beef with Zelani, a character who didn't even exist until semi-recently. Even the Darkin saga has the fallen God Warriors mainly just fighting each other and Kael around Targon, despite the fact that they'd have to rampage through Shurima to even get there. Like, Zareth's territory is literally right next to the Sacred Mountain. Why doesn't he have any reaction to the apocalyptic battle happening on his doorstep? Where is he? And no, before you say it, I don't think the corrupted skins are meant to be canon to that event. They're just sort of generic evil skins for the characters, which do look really cool, but I don't really take them any more seriously than that. Also, if the corrupted skins were canon, that would mean Atreus gets taken over for a second time, which is just pure disrespect to his character at that point. Honestly, if the aspects are meant to be the main enemies of the Darkin, then that, to me, really only reinforces the idea that the Darkin would work better as demons. We already know that the gods of Targon have beef with demonkind. Zoe has Phil Six's key, and supposedly Ashlesh was sealed away by celestial beings. Sure, Targon gave Shurima the Sun Disk, so you could see them having to deal with the Darkin as the consequences of that, but you could just as easily have Zareth or Azir fill the same role in that regard. I mean, even the idea of the Darkin being fallen heroes doesn't feel as well explored as it should be. Aatrox and Varys are the only ones who really lean into that. None of the other Darkin really seem to care about or comment on their time as Ascended all that much, or lament on their transformations. For all intents and purposes, most of them really are just cursed weapons that possess anyone who picks them up. I really don't see why you couldn't just have Aatrox being an Ascended warrior who is possessed by a Darkin and let the others all be their own things. The Shuriman Civil War could still happen and end with Twilight of the Gods. We could just say that all the God Warriors involved in the fighting died in Maisha's trap. It wouldn't really contradict anything, save for Naganeka surviving somehow and Ross getting briefly name-dropped. The likes of Ibarros, Straiatu, and Zelani were never at the meeting anyways, and didn't exist until Legends of Runeterra added them, so what's the harm, really? Ultimately, I guess my only real complaint is that I wish being former Ascended actually meant something to the Darkin other than being this surface level detail to try and give them some more backstory, when they ultimately don't need it. Maybe if we got some stories, possibly even a novel that focused on the Ascended host before their downfall, I'd be way more invested in the idea. Show us what Ibarros did to become the champion of the Dunes. Let us experience Geralt's desperate defense against the Void. Maybe even let us see Zelani's kind and caring personality before she comes up with this crazy blood control hive mind plan of hers. But that's ultimately just how I feel on the matter. What do you guys think? Do you like the Darkin as they are, or would you have preferred to see a different angle explored with them? Leave your thoughts and comments down below, and I'll see you all next time.